Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the story about Naruto. What if Naruto become an assassin? Part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please do support for more awesome content and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And also support the creator of this fanfic. I have created many playlists, check it out in the channel. So let's start the video. The full moon in the sky lit up the quiet streets of Paris. A few people were about the streets, most of them being the city guard. The few who weren't were courtesans plying their trade, or men, and women stumbling home drunk from the taverns they had been populating. Near the great cathedral of Notre Dame, a man dressed in somewhat regal clothing was making his way towards the cathedral. He would look over his shoulder occasionally, as if searching for something or someone. But nothing was visible to the naked eye. Eventually, he made his way around the side and stopped as he reached a certain section of the wall. Looking around again to make sure no one could see him, the man pressed a certain part of the wall. That part of the wall slid in, and a clicking noise was heard. Suddenly a large section of the wall, big enough for a man to slip through, opened up. The man slowly slipped inside, and the wall closed behind him. All was silent and still for a moment before a figure emerged from the wall of the nearby canal. The shadowy figure moved with purpose to the same section the man had just disappeared through and quickly imitated what the first man had done. Within seconds, the secret door was open and the figure slipped through. The shadowy figure found himself at the top of a long steep staircase with some torches lit along the walls. The figure seemed to scan the stairwell for something before descending downwards. Further ahead, the first figure had already descended down the stairs and was now in a large room filled with many stone tombs. He slowly passed them all, stopping at a wall in the back. The wall seemed just as normal as any of the others in the crypt. The man pulled a piece of parchment from his coat and immediately began looking it over, unaware of the second shadowy figure reaching the crypt and hiding behind one of the tombs. The second figure slowly peeked around the corner, watching as the unaware man began tracing a finger over the wall. He slowly began to press certain parts of the wall, and those parts actually sunk in. When he pushed the last one, the entire wall slowly split apart, revealing a narrow, dank passage. The man stuffed the parchment back into his coat and quickly entered. His silent follower stealthily shot up and rushed into the passage after him, just before the wall closed behind them. The first man slowly made his way along the passage, following its twists and turns until eventually, the passage opened into a hall that stretched before him. The hall was mostly bare, save for pillars and torches in their wall sconces. At the end, there was a raised stone platform with a faded red cloth covering it. And lying on that cloth were two objects. The man eagerly rushed forward to the platform and stopped as he reached it, admiring the two objects on it. One of them was a round, silver sphere with strange glowing markings upon it. The other was a spear, the pole simple, but the spearhead decorative. Like the sphere, it was also silver and also glowed with strange markings. The man grinned as he slowly reached out to grab the objects. That is, until a voice stopped him. "I would not do that if I were you, senor." He whirled, his eyes widening, as he saw the second figure step out of the shadow at the foot of the stairs. Now the figure finally became fully illuminated. The man was wearing a long crimson robe with splits in the front and back to allow for easy movements. He also had long sleeves, an open collar, and a hood that came to a peak. Underneath the robe he wore another closed collar shirt and black pants with boots. Over his robe, the figure wore a pair of steel bracers and a red sash around his waist. Over that sash was a belt covered with supply pouches, sheaths with throwing knives, and a pair of scabbards. One had a sword with a simple hilt and cross guard, and the other had a long knife. The belt buckle was shaped in a strange triangular design with a rounded bottom. Finishing out the outfit the man wore was a cloak worn over his right shoulder and arm, a small crossbow slung on his back, and leather armor covering his chest, left shoulder, and boots. The figure's face was half hidden by his hood, keeping his eyes in shadow. But the lower part of his face was revealed, showing a tanned, youthful face. He was grinning slightly, with his hands spread out. The first man snarled. "Assassin!" he yelled, reaching into his coat and pulling out a wheel-lock pistol. Just as he prepared to fire it, a crossbow bolt smashed the firearm from his hand, causing it to go as it hit the floor. The first man glared at the assassin, who was calmly putting his crossbow away. "François Ansel," the assassin said calmly in somewhat rough French. member of the French chapter of the Templar Order, assigned to investigate the rumors of strange artifacts within Paris. My name is Rafael Cortez, and I'll be the assassin assigned to stop you tonight. Francois growled at him. You can't stop me, assassin. With these artifacts, I'll be invincible. I shall take over the Templar Order, wipe out your pathetic kind, and finally bring peace to the world. He spun around, lunging, and grabbing the spear off the platform. As he did, Raphael rushed forward, while grabbing his sword from its scabbard. Francois spun, stabbing at Raphael, who parried the blow in time with his sword and punched Francois across the jaw. The French Templar rolled over the platform and got up as Raphael jumped on the table and slashed down at him. Francois blocked the sword with the spear before Raphael was blown back by a sudden explosion of energy from the spear. Raphael managed to land on his feet, staring, as Francois grinned almost insanely as he now held the glowing spear. Yes, I can feel the power now. The power coursing through this. Do you know what this is? He asked with a grin. Raphael slowly held his sword in a defensive position as Francois continued. This is the famed Spear of Destiny. The Holy Lance. The spear that pierced the side of Jesus Christ during the crucifixion. With it, and that apple of Eden, I am invincible. I will take over the Templar Order and kill your pathetic rabble of assassins, and then the world will know true peace. Francois lunged at Raphael, who barely parried the spearhead to one side. He swung his blade around, going for a quick strike at Francois. But, as his blade neared the Templar's arm, a strange golden energy erupted around him, deflecting the blow. Raphael's hidden eyes widened in shock before the haft of the spear slammed into his chest, knocking him back. Raphael rolled, bringing his right arm up and activating a small mechanism on the bottom of the steel bracer on his right arm. The mechanism went off, revealing it was a small pistol. The bullet smashed into the energy field around Francois, but was deflected again. Francois laughed madly as he rushed forward, swinging the spear down at Raphael. Raphael blocked with his sword and pushed him back. Francois growled and stabbed at him again. Raphael rolled behind him, swinging and striking hard and fast at him. Yet again, the energy field stopped his attack. Raphael quickly jumped back, creating some space between himself and Francois while sheathing his sword. None of his weapons were having an effect, it seemed. The spear seemed to be protecting him with some type of energy field. Francois growled and lunged at him, trying to stab him again. Raphael grabbed the spear shaft and punched Francois, who titled his head to avoid the blow. The two now held the spear shaft and were struggling to pull the weapon from each other. Their struggle pushed them towards the stone platform. Suddenly, Francois smashed his head into Raphael's in a nasty headbutt. The surprised and stunned assassin fell back onto the stone platform, his hood falling down. This revealed his shoulder-length brown hair, pulled back into a ponytail, as well as his dark brown eyes. He shook his head, trying to clear it, only to grunt as he felt Francois pin him down with a foot on his chest. The French Templar grinned as he held up the spear, ready to stab down at him. You will be the beginning, he said with a mad grin. You are at the beginning of your order's end. He raised the spear higher, savoring the moment before the kill. Raphael's eyes widened before he madly looked to either side. His eyes locked on something to his right, and he reached over, grabbing it. As Francois stabbed down, Raphael yanked the nearby sphere and used it to block the spear, knocking it so it stabbed into the stone platform. His left fist clenched and reared back, slamming into Francois's face and sending him flying back. He dropped the sphere on the platform, not noticing the two glowing with energy crackling over the surface of the sphere and the spearhead. Francois slowly got up, drawing a knife from his coat. He growled, lunging at Raphael. Raphael blocked his arm, holding the knife with his right arm, while he punched Francois in the face repeatedly with his left fist. He then shoved Francois against a wall, holding him there with his hand at Francois. I take no joy in taking a life, he said quietly as he raised his left arm. But I do what is needed to protect the freedom of mankind, he said as he seemed to flex his left hand. As he did this, a foot-long blade emerged from the underside of his left bracer. He plunged it into Francois's neck, causing the French Templar's eyes to widen in pain and fear. Blood began to seep from his mouth as Raphael retracted the blade from Francois's throat. Francois slowly slumped to the ground, blood seeping from his throat and mouth as he stared at Raphael. Slowly though, his eyes glazed over and he slumped over. Raphael slowly knelt down and closed his eyes. Descansa en la paz, rest in peace, he whispered in Spanish. He stood again, looking towards the stone platform. It was then he noticed now high amounts of energy radiating from the two artifacts. His eyes widened as he lunged over to them, but it was too late. There was a sudden explosion of energy, sending him flying back. He crashed onto the floor as the spear went flying by, crashing into the far wall. The sphere landed next to Raphael. Raphael groaned, slowly trying to get up, only to blink as he felt a pull. He looked up, his eyes widening in fear. Where the stone platform had been was now some type of tear in the very air. And it was sucking in everything in the room. Even now, the apple of Eden, the sphere next to him, began rolling forward towards the rip. Raphael struggled to back away, grabbing onto a pillar as the apple was pulled into the rip, followed by Francois's body. Raphael grunted as his body was slowly lifted from the ground, being pulled towards the strange anomaly. He felt the pull getting stronger as he struggled to hang on. Eventually though, it was too much. Raphael felt his grip loosening before he was pulled free. With a yell, he fell into the rip. A few minutes later, the hole disappeared as the energy that fed it, built up from the contact of two pieces of Eden, burned out. Unknown place and time. A man dressed in the robes of a Buddhist monk sat on a hill overlooking a grassy plain. He was humming quietly as he wrote in a scroll with a calligraphy brush. As he paused in his writing, he looked up, enjoying the afternoon. He smiled, his eyes closed. Those eyes snapped open though as he heard what sounded like explosions coming from above him. His eyes widened as the sky darkened and lightning began to streak across the sky. Before he could even get up to head for cover, the sky seemed to split open and a strange silver object shot out of the opening, smashing into the grassy plain below. Almost as quickly as it appeared, the opening disappeared. The monk blinked before standing up and grabbing his staff off the ground. He slowly approached the object that had crashed into the ground. Perhaps it was some strange meteorite? When he arrived at the crash site, he was surprised. There was a small impact crater, but there was no fire or debris. And the object he could now see was a sphere, made of what seemed to be silver with strange glowing runes. The monk slowly reached out with his staff and touched the object. After a few seconds he pulled it back and touched the end of the staff. Feeling that it was still cool, he knelt down. Very slowly, he reached out a hand and touched the sphere. It was cool to his touch, so he picked it up to examine it. He slowly began to turn it over, looking it over. His eyes widened as he saw the glow intensify. Before he could drop it, energy surged from the sphere and struck him in the eyes. He let out a scream of pain as the energy continued to pour into his eyes, into his mind. He felt such agony that he had never experienced before. At the same time, he felt like his body was filled with fire. Fire that spread to every tip of his anatomy. This continued for a few minutes before the energy faded and the monk fell to his hands and knees. The sphere rolled a few feet away from him as he remained there, shuddering and panting. The monk slowly lifted his head, panting, his eyes closed. But when they opened, his eyes were changed. Where once they had been black, they now were purple, almost gray, and had numerous rings in a ripple pattern. The monk painted as he looked to the sphere. So much information was coursing through his mind. So much knowledge. And that fire from before. He felt it in his body. He had never felt this before, and yet it felt natural. As if it had always been a part of him. The monk looked to the sphere. This knowledge, this feeling in his body. He needed to understand it more. To understand what had been done to him. Slowly he grabbed the sphere and stood up. Whatever this energy was, he would need a name for it. Perhaps chakra? That could work. It was upon this day that the man known as the Sage of Six Paths was born. 2. Another unknown place and time. The night sky above a village was filled with fireworks going off, illuminating the sky and the village. Below, the people were celebrating some type of festival, enjoying their merriment. Children giggled as they ran from stand to stand while their parents watched over them. Young couples stopped to buy items or slip into a quiet corner to make out. Older men and women stopped to talk with each other, reminiscing about their younger years. It was due to the fireworks and explosions above and the merriment of the festival below that no one saw the rip opening in the sky or saw the figure falling from it. On the outskirts of the village, inside a massive defensive wall that encompassed it, the figure hit the water of a pond within a wooded area and sank. A few moments later the figure burst from the water, swimming to shore where they collapsed, panting heavily. Rafael Cortez didn't know how long he lay there, but eventually, he felt some strength return to his body. He managed to pull himself further out of the pond and onto the ground. He slowly staggered to his feet, holding his head. His whole body felt like it was burning, and his head was pounding. The sudden sound of an explosion forced him to look up, his eyes widening, as he saw fireworks going off in the night sky. And they widened further as he saw them illuminate a strange mountain that seemed to have massive faces on it. 4 faces, each overlooking what looked like a village in the distance. Raphael just stared in bewilderment. Where the hell was he? He had been in a crypt under Paris, and now he was in some type of field with a village in the distance and fireworks going off. It made no sense. Grunting, Raphael slowly headed towards the village, hunched over a bit. Maybe they could help him understand where he was. As he walked, he felt the pain slowly leave his body. He still ached from the impact with the water and the frantic swim to shore, but the pain from his time in whatever that was fading. He slowly stood straight, moving more normally. It took him about 20 minutes to finally reach the village. When he did, his eyes widened. There were hundreds of people milling about in some sort of festival. They were wearing a variety of clothing. Most seemed to be wearing some type of decorative robes, with a few wearing normal shirts and pants in a variety of colors. Others seemed to be wearing some type of uniform, consisting of dark blue pants and shirts and a green vest with a red swirl on the back. These figures also wore headbands with a metal plate on the forehead with a strange emblem on it. This seemed to be some type of uniform, indicating they were soldiers or guards of some type. Raphael slowly slid into an alley, observing them. Wherever he was, it certainly wasn't any place he had seen or heard of before. Since when did people have green or red or blue hair? As he remained in the alley, a family passed by, stopping at a stall. He blinked as he tried to listen in on them. He stopped, though, when he heard what they were saying. Is that Japanese? He thought. His mind went back to a few years ago, to a woman he met from that country. A fellow assassin who had fled from Japan when a samurai killed her father and raped her mother. Her name had been Sasuke, which translated to the word tracking from her language. An excellent name for an assassin. She had fled from Japan by way of a fishing boat. She had come across an assassin cell in China, and they had accepted her into their ranks. After she became a full assassin, she traveled to Rome, seeking more training from Ezio in how to start an assassin cell in Japan. During her time in Rome, she and Raphael had become friends. She had learned some rough Italian before reaching Rome. Raphael had helped finish her lessons in Italian, while she in return had taught him Japanese. Now, he tried to recall those lessons. And, as he did, the words coming from the family began to make sense. "Otu-san, can we go play the fishing game next?" The family's son asked eagerly, as the father bought some food. "Of course, Sachi. This is a special night after all," the father said with a smile as they moved off. Raphael sighed quietly. He hoped he could remember his lessons. Otherwise, this could be trouble. But this definitely could mean he was in Japan. Perhaps he could find Kuki again? Find out how he ended up in Japan? He needed more information. And the best place for that would be some type of market or plaza. He wouldn't see anything from down here though. Looking at the buildings on either side of the alley he was in, he nodded as he saw imperfections and footholds. No windows though. That could be troublesome. But he'd find a way up. He turned and ran up the wall he had been leaning against, gaining enough height to grab an imperfection in the wall. He then moved to a jutting piece of masonry before continuing his climb up till he reached the roof and pulled himself up onto the top of the building. Slowly, he looked around for a high point where he could climb and scan the village. His eyes landed on what looked like a tall apartment building nearby. Nodding, he began to run in that direction. The people below didn't notice the robed and hooded figure running from rooftop to rooftop. But a group of 4 shadowy figures did. They had been racing along rooftops themselves, heading in the opposite direction when they had seen the figure. The leader of the group of 4 raised a hand and pointed in the direction of the figure. As one they followed, shadowing the assassin. Raphael soon reached the apartment building and began to climb to the top, quickly reaching it where he crouched down on its highest point. Slowly he began to scan the village with his eyes, taking in the layout as far as he could see. As he did, he stopped to admire the large mountain with 4 stone faces on it. Some type of monument. Definitely impressive. But when his eyes turned back to the village, he blinked, confused. He hadn't really noticed before, but the buildings and the streets. They were illuminated in a strange manner. He had seen the lights, but assumed they were torches or lanterns. But now, as he took a more serious look, he could see that wasn't the case. Many of the lights seemed to be some strange glowing sphere that didn't waver like the flames of a torch or candle would. What were these strange lights? He shook it from his thoughts and was about to scan the village again, only to stop when he heard yelling. He turned to the general sound of the yelling, trying to pinpoint it. There seemed to be some sort of scuffle in a side street. Raphael bit his lip before nodding to himself. Standing up, he looked down to the street. Seeing a hay cart, he took a deep breath before spreading his arms and jumping. He somersaulted in the air and landed in the hay cart. Taking a moment to recover, he hopped out and headed down the street, drawing a few stares. Especially from the four shadows who had been tailing him. Raphael quickly headed to the street where he had seen the scuffle and stopped at the corner of an intersection, peeking around the corner. What he saw made him freeze and blood boil. There was a group of people, each carrying an item of some sort. Knives, rocks, and a few carried broken glass bottles. They were yelling at a pair of figures in front of them. One of those figures was a small boy, perhaps 5 years old, wearing a dirty white shirt with a red spiral and blue pants. He had blonde spiky hair, but any other features were hidden, as the boy was cringing and covering his head with his arms. The other was a girl about 17 years old. She had violet hair in a strange, fan-like short ponytail. She had brown eyes that didn't seem to have pupils and was wearing a mesh fishnet top with no sleeves, with a black tube top covering her breasts. She also was wearing dark-colored shorts, knee-high boots, and mesh armbands covering her forearms and elbows. She also had the headband he had seen others wear. She was gripping some type of knife and yelling at the group before her. "Just leave him alone." The girl yelled at the others, gripping her knife. The leader of the group sneered. "Look at this, boys. The snake whore is defending the demon." "Why isn't that surprising?" The others sneered and yelled. The girl growled, her eyes narrowing in anger. "The only demons I see are the people who would pick on a defenseless boy. Just leave him alone." One of the men scoffed. "Forget about it. We'll kill them both and rid this village of the demon and the traitor," he shouted as he rushed at Anko with a knife raised. The girl named Anko gripped her knife, ready to block. She didn't have to. The man was hit by a red blur from the side, smashed into the ground. The red blur became identified as Raphael, who proceeded to smash his left fist into the man's face, knocking him out. He got up and turned to look at the small mob, who now gripped their weapons. "You will leave now, if you know what's good for you," he said in rough, almost broken Japanese. The leader growled. "He's just one man. Get him," he shouted as he rushed Raphael, his followers behind him. Raphael shook his head as he settled into a stance, raising both hands. The first man, armed with a rock, tried to smash it into his head. Raphael grabbed his arm and flipped him over, smashing him into the ground before kicking back at the next one, his foot smashing into the second man's stomach. He rolled to one side, kicking the third assailant's feet out from under him before knocking him out with a rapid punch to the face. The fourth one came at him with a knife. Raphael grabbed his arms, twisting them around behind him and forcing the knife out of the man's hand. Grabbing it, he spun it, smashing the hilt into the man's skull. The leader came at him, armed with a butcher knife. Raphael flexed both his hands, causing two blades to emerge from under his bracers. He raised them, blocking the man's overhead swing before parrying it down and to the right. He smashed his left elbow into the man's face and kicked him in the chest. The leader of the small mob hit the wall of a building, only to find both of the blades coming from Raphael's bracers crossing over his neck, ready to slit his throat in a second. Raphael painted lightly as he stared at the man before head-butting him, knocking him out. Anko watched the whole thing, amazed. This man had come out of nowhere and defeated the small mob within a minute. She didn't notice the blonde figure she had been protecting run away. Anko was about to speak when four shadows dropped down, surrounding Raphael. Each was wearing dark blue pants and sleeveless shirts. They also each had gray metal bracers and some type of armored vests. Each also had a tanto strapped to their back and wore a full face mask with what looked like a different animal design on each mask. Raphael blinked at these figures as each drew their tanto. The one wearing what looked like some type of bird mask spoke up from behind their mask. "Sir, we must ask you to step away from the civilians and keep your hands in the air," he said. Raphael slowly backed away from the now unconscious man, his hands moving to his sides. As he did, he stealthily pulled some objects from his pouches on his belt. The bird-masked figure stepped forward. "Sir, put your hands in the air, or we will be forced to attack," he shouted. Raphael slowly raised his arms, hands clenched. As he did, he smirked slightly. That smirk triggered the instincts of all four masked figures. "Take him down," the bird-masked one yelled. Just as they lunged at him, Raphael threw his hands down. The smoke bombs he had been concealing exploded, enveloping the area in smoke. The four masked figures jumped back, not wanting to be caught in the smoke, and lost their target. When the smoke cleared though, there was no sign of Raphael. The four masked figures looked at each other and nodded before splitting up. Raphael was rushing through the crowd of festival goers, trying to escape. People were watching as he rushed by, some yelling, as he almost knocked some of them over or crashed into them. Raphael kept running, only for his eyes to widen as he saw a cart blocking his path. Seeing no choice, he strafed left, jumping through a stand, causing the person running it to duck down. Raphael bypassed a cart and continued his run. Above, one of the masked figures had found him and was following him using the rooftops. As he did, he reached up to touch his ear. Found him. Raphael was moving down a side alley when one of the figures wearing a green vest and headband appeared in front of him. This man also had red eyes with strange black markings in them. Raphael blinked as the man made strange gestures with his hand before his eyes widened as a massive fireball seemed to erupt from the man's mouth and shot towards him. Raphael turned, seeing an awning over an entrance to a shop. He grabbed it and flipped over, landing on it as the fireball went shooting by. Raphael jumped from the awning to a signpost sticking out before climbing to the roofs. He began to run again, not wanting to look back. He didn't know what the hell that was, but it certainly wasn't something a normal person could do. Was it a power from an artifact? He didn't know. What he did know was there was now a fist heading towards his head. He barely managed to duck under it and spun, now facing his attacker. It was one of the masked figures, this one with a tiger mask. "Surrender now or I'll have to use lethal force," the figure said. Raphael's response was to raise his fists, ready to fight. The figure shook his head and charged at Raphael. Raphael blocked his first punch but received a second to the ribs. He grunted and grabbed the man's arm, throwing him away. The figure flipped in the air and bounced off a power transformer, shooting back at Raphael. Raphael launched a fast punch at the masked figure's head, only for his eyes to widen as the man disappeared in a puff of smoke, replaced by a log. He felt a sudden blow to the back of his head, knocking him to his knees. A kick to the ribs flipped him over, causing him to land on his back. He hit the ground and skidded, his crossbow falling loose. He struggled to get up, only to see the masked figure pin him down. His last conscious sight was a fist coming at his head before all became blackness. The masked figure sighed as he stood over the now unconscious figure. He slowly reached up and activated his mic. "This is Tora, Tiger, Totori, Bird. Target has been subdued. Acknowledged. Remove all weapons on his person and take him to Anbu headquarters. I'll contact Hokage-sama about this," the leader said over the comm radio. Tora nodded to himself as he began to remove Raphael's weapons. It looked like things were going to be interesting in Konoha. Here is in Sarutobi, Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato sighed and rubbed his wrinkled forehead as he walked down a corridor in the Anbu headquarters. He had been at home with his family, enjoying a rare moment of peace and quiet when an Anbu had appeared and delivered the news. A small group of drunken men had cornered Naruto Uzumaki and tried to attack him, only to be stopped by OCAnko Mitarashi. When the mob moved to attack her, as well, an unknown assailant attacked them using nothing but an unknown form of taijutsu. When an Anbu patrol moved to arrest him, he nearly escaped using impressive freerunning and parkour skills. However, he had eventually been knocked out, restrained, and brought here. Sarutobi quietly looked over a scroll detailing what had been learned so far about this individual. The person wore some type of robe with leather-based armor and hood and carried numerous weapons. Sarutobi glanced at a part of the report detailing what had been removed from the captive. The assailant carries numerous weapons, almost all of which seem to be light and maneuverable. These weapons include one sword of unknown design and origin, one dagger of unknown design and origin, one crossbow with quiver of 25 bolts, one pouch containing 2 smoke bombs, one pouch containing 10 unknown small metal balls and 10 small paper tubes filled with black powder. Possibly explosives. One belt containing 20 small throwing knives of unknown design and origin. Two bracers containing retractable blades. Right-hand bracer also contains a hollow needle containing poison, some type of dart launching system, and an apparatus of unknown capabilities. Tactical analysis: due to the light weight of the weapons and armor removed from individuals, as well as the nature of quite a few of the weapons and items removed, the assailant is possibly a non-ninja trained assassin. A scan of the assailant by a Hyuuga has confirmed that the assailant has chakra coils of sufficient size to be a ninja, but that no evidence of any type of training or control of chakra is present. Sarutobi sighed again at that. This man seemed to be an assassin of some type. But where he was from and what was his target were the questions. Another question though was bothering him. If this man was an assassin, why did he blow his cover to protect Naruto and OCAnko? Why did he use non-lethal force against those civilians when he could have easily dispatched them and left? Sarutobi shook his head as he approached a secure room where the man was being held. Outside stood two Anbu, rigid and at attention. Sarutobi nodded to them both, and one of them opened the door. The room inside was lit by only a single lamp hanging above a table. Sitting on one side was an imposing figure dressed in a gray uniform with a black overcoat and gloves. Over his head he wore a Konoha headband like a bandana, hiding the numerous burns and scars that decorated his head. This was Ibiki Marino, Konoha's head interrogator. Sitting across from him was the assailant. The figure was still wearing the robe, minus the armor, and with the hood down. This revealed a young man, probably 17 or 18. He had tanned skin, with the beginnings of a beard growing in. His brown hair was shoulder length, but pulled back into a ponytail. His brown eyes were looking up, watching Sarutobi. Ibiki slowly stood up and walked over to Sarutobi before whispering quietly to him. "Hokage-sama, I haven't been able to get anything out of him. I'm tempted to bring a Yamanaka in to do a mind dive if we can't get any answers from him." Sarutobi nodded quietly. "Call Inoichi in. While you do that, I'll see if I can't get through to him." Ibiki nodded and headed out the door. As he did, one of the Anbu moved inside to act as a guard in case the prisoner did anything. Sarutobi slowly sat down, watching the young man in front of him. The man grinned at him. "So, what can I do for you, senor?" he asked. Sarutobi raised an eyebrow. "What?" he asked. Raphael just smiled. "Pay it no mind. But I have to ask, is this how people who rescue damsels in distress and young kids are treated? If so, I'll have to remember not to do it again. Or at least, not get caught," he said in a joking voice. Sarutobi let out a sigh. "I do not wish to waste time with jokes," he said simply. "The only reason you are not being interrogated and tortured for information is because you were protecting one of my shinobi and a child being unfairly abused. That can be changed quickly. Now tell me, who is your target here in Konoha?" The smile faded from Raphael's face and eyes, and he sighed. "Very well. I have no idea where I am," he said simply. "I did not come here to your village on purpose. One minute I'm in an underground chamber under a city. Next I'm falling into the woods outside your village. I was trying to get my bearings and locate some information when I ran into the mob problem," he said simply, sitting back. Sarutobi eyed him. "You expect me to believe that you just appeared suddenly? From out of nowhere?" Raphael shrugged. "I expect you to believe nothing. Accept my story or don't. All I care about is not dying or being imprisoned if I can avoid it." Sarutobi sat back. "Then please, tell me your story," he said simply. Raphael tilted his head back and thought for a moment before finally speaking. "My name is Rafael Cortez. I was born in a country called what's the word again? Yes, Spain, Spain." Sarutobi blinked at that. "I've never heard of such a country," he said. Raphael shrugged. "That is not entirely surprising, I suppose. Cathay has been pretty much closed off to outsiders for centuries, hasn't it?" he asked. Sarutobi blinked. "Cathay, what is Cathay?" Raphael raised an eyebrow. This country, or rather this area, is known as Cathay to my people. Although, if I remember correctly, your people call it Nippon, or Nihon, yes." Sarutobi just stared at him. "This country is called Hai no Kuni, Land of Fire. I have never heard it referred to as Nippon," he said. Raphael's eyes widened at that. "I'm okay, I think I can maybe clear things up," he said. "May I see a map of the world? Please?" Sarutobi just sighed and signaled the Anbu inside the room. That Anbu went to the door and talked to the one outside, who nodded and disappeared. A few minutes later he was back with a map. The Anbu inside the room took it and laid it on the table, weighting the corners down. Raphael took one look and his heart stopped beating. He knew that maps of the Cathay region were still fairly raw and inaccurate, so the difference between a European map of the region and a native map of the region would probably be quite different. But what he saw here was far too different to simply be a lack of knowledge of the area. It could only mean one thing. Slowly, Raphael slumped back into his chair, just staring at the map. Then he slowly looked up at Saratobi. "I think there is something very wrong here," he said simply. Saratobi leaned forward. "What is wrong is that someone with a lot of assassin weapons attacked civilians in my village. Now I want to know how you got into my village and why," he said, his voice dead serious. Raphael looked up at him. "I don't know, alright? I don't know. As I said, I was in a tomb underneath a cathedral, and then there was an explosion of energy and some type of hole or vortex that sucked me in. And then I'm suddenly falling into the woods outside your village. That's all I know," he shouted. Saratobi watched him. "I see. And what proof do you have exactly of this vortex that brought you here?" Raphael growled. "I don't have any. How can I prove a giant rip in the air dropped me here into your village?" The Anbu tensed at Raphael's yelling and grabbed the ninjato strapped to his back, but was stopped by a raised hand from Saratobi. Saratobi watched Raphael, who was looking at the map again. His body seemed to be radiating an aura of defeat. At that moment, the door opened and Ibiki entered with a man wearing black pants and a black long-sleeved shirt. He also wore black sandals with what appeared to be cloth or tape around the ankles, gauntlets over his forearms, and a green flak vest with numerous pockets. Over this he wore a red sleeveless coat. The man had long blonde hair in a high ponytail and black headband with the metal plate, an emblem Raphael had seen around town. Saratobi looked up. "Inoichi-san, thank you for coming," he said, getting up. The now named Inoichi bowed. "Ibiki-san said you needed me to do a mind dive?" he asked his leader. Saratobi nodded. "Indeed. I'm afraid that so far, my conversation has not turned up anything concrete. I need to know the truth." The Hokage turned back to Raphael, who looked up. "Memories? How is he going to see my memories?" he asked. Nobody answered. Instead, Inoichi began to make strange symbols with his hands. Raphael blinked before suddenly he went rigid as he felt like something was entering his body. He slumped over, eyes half closed, and glassed over. At the same time, Inoichi's body had slumped over, with Ibiki catching him and putting him in a chair. Saratobi sighed as he watched the young man. "I'm not sure exactly what to make of his Ibiki. So far, it almost sounds like he was transported here from somewhere else. Like summoning jutsu almost. While I find it highly ridiculous, I'm still wondering if he wasn't somehow summoned here." Ibiki turned to look at his leader. "If that is the case, Hokage-sama, the real question is who or what summoned him here. I do not doubt, though, that he is not from any of the major shinobi villages. His weapons and clothing match nothing we've seen before from the other nations. And you would think, if he was an assassin, he would be trained in ninjutsu and such. According to the Hyuuga who scanned him, he basically has none of the signs of being trained in the use of chakra." Saratobi nodded. "This is all just too strange to understand." It was at that moment that Inoichi's body jerked, revealing he was back. His eyes shot open, and he gasped, panting heavily. Raphael jerked as well, looking up. "What the hell was that?" he demanded. Inoichi ignored him as he turned to Saratobi and Ibiki. "Hokage-sama, you're not going to believe what I have to tell you," he said. The Rusty Kunai, Konoha. The Rusty Kunai was one of those types of bars that catered to shinobi. While there were bars that catered to civilians and shinobi, those serving as ninjas of Konoha couldn't talk as freely since civilians and possible spies were about. Shinobi bars, though, were a lot safer. The staff always was retired shinobi, whether they were the few who made it to old age or were suffering from a physical or mental trauma that kept them from active duty. One of the patrons of this particular establishment tonight was Kurenai Yuhi, a chunin in service to Konoha. The 19-year-old Kunoichi was dressed in a crimson bodysuit with no sleeves and the standard military green flak jacket. Her headband was tied around her forehead, with her long curly raven hair flowing past her shoulders. Her ruby red eyes stared down at the cup of sake before her before she drank it. She didn't notice the presence behind her till they sat down on the stool next to her at the bar. She sighed as she glanced over to her right, seeing her probably closest friend. "Finally get off duty, Anko?" she asked in a slightly tired and slurred voice, indicating she was starting to feel the sake she had been drinking for the past hour. Anko Mitarashi grinned. "Oh, don't be like that, Nai-chan. I got a good excuse," she said. Kurenai just sighed as she signaled the bartender, ordering a round of sake for Anko. When she got her drink, Anko gulped it down and grinned. "Good stuff. Thanks, Kurenai." Kurenai just grunted as Anko pouted. "Come on, liven up a bit." Kurenai just glanced at Anko, who sighed. "It has been like this every year for 5 years now." On October 10th, Kurenai would find a bar and get drunk. She did it to try and numb the pain and memories of what happened this night 5 years ago. Her father had died while fighting the Kyuubi no Kitsune, a giant chakra entity of hatred and destruction, when it attacked Konoha. Kurenai looked down at her cup and filled it again. "So what happened?" she asked, sipping it. Anko grinned. "Well, I was out patrolling the festival, keeping people from getting out of control. And I found this group of drunken idiots causing problems. Now when I stepped in, I think you can guess how they reacted," she said. Kurenai just quietly nodded. Anko Mitarashi was strongly disliked within the village. The sad thing was, she didn't do anything to earn it. But when you're apprentice to one of the greatest traders of the village, people don't care about that anymore. Only one other person in all of Konoha received more hate and disdain than Anko. Anko just smiled. "So anyways, it looked like they were going to attack me. When out of nowhere, this guy wearing this weird hooded robe thing, or whatever, came flying in and just took these guys apart. I mean, he took them all down in less than 20 seconds, and the last guy totally made him pee his pants." She broke into giggles as she took another drink from her own sake cup and filled it back up. "And then the Anbu came in, since he was attacking civilians, and he totally gave them the slip. Whoever that guy was, he was pretty good." Kurenai raised an eyebrow at her. "You're complimenting someone who broke the law and escaped from justice?" she asked. Anko pouted. "Well, he was eventually arrested. But come on, the guy came in, saved my butt, and totally took those assholes down. I can't admire that?" Kurenai just grunted. "So you're late because you had to be debriefed on the whole thing, right?" When Anko nodded, Kurenai looked back at her drink. "So what were those drunkards doing in the first place?" Anko hesitated a bit before answering. They were about to attack Naruto Uzumaki." Kurenai tensed a bit, her drink partway to her lips. After a few moments, she finally drank it. "That brat, huh?" she asked, staring at the bar. Anko sighed, but before she could respond, Kurenai kept speaking. "Maybe you should have let them have their fun," she said. Anko froze at that. She had never heard Kurenai talk like that before. "Kurenai, he's only 5 years old. He's just a little kid. I'm supposed to let a bunch of drunken assholes beat him up?" Kurenai shrugged. "Everyone needs to take care of their grief somehow," she said. Anko just narrowed her eyes. "And what if it had been family or friends of the victims of Orochimaru's experiments? Should I just let them take care of their grief by beating me up?" Kurenai looked at her. "It's not the same, Anko." Anko just growled as she got up. "You know damn well it is the same, Kurenai. I'm right behind Naruto on this village's shit list. You need to wake up and realize that Naruto isn't the reason your dad's dead. He's just a scapegoat everyone likes to use when they're not using me." She turned and stormed away. Kurenai tried to stop her, but Anko was gone. Sighing, Kurenai slumped on her barstool. She glanced at her cup of sake before leaving it with money for her drinks as she started to head for home. She would need to talk to Anko in the morning if the snake-wielding Chunin would even listen to her. "Maybe drinking on the anniversary of my dad's death isn't such a great idea," she thought as she stumbled home. Anbu interrogation room. Saratobi was rubbing his wrinkled forehead as he finished listening to Inoichi's report. They had moved outside the interrogation room for now. "I'm really too old for this. So you're telling me he is from another world?" he asked Inoichi. Inoichi shook his head. "Not just another world, Hokage-sama. He's from another reality, another realm of existence. I saw everything he remembered. The people where he came from have no chakra or inner energy. None whatsoever. Even civilians here have very basic chakra coils. They might not be able to access their chakra, but they still have it. But in his world, chakra does not exist." Ibiki glanced through the observation window into the room where Raphael was glaring in their general direction. He hadn't taken kindly to having the sanctity of his mind violated. And what is his role exactly? Inoichi nodded. He is an assassin. And I don't just mean he's a person who goes around killing people. He is part of a brotherhood of assassins. From what I could understand of his memories, his order works entirely by itself, with no connections, backing or funding from any village. They claim they are safeguarding the future and freedom of mankind, fighting against some mysterious shadow group. I believe he calls them Templars. Apparently these Templars are trying to bring about world peace by enslaving people and taking away their free will. And the assassins are stopping them. Saratobi just shook his head. And you're certain these memories are authentic? He asked. Inoichi nodded. Believe me, Hokage-sama, I checked, double-checked, and triple-checked his mind. There were no signs of these being false memories that he created or that were implanted into him. These memories are 100% purely his own memories. Then how is it that he has chakra? You said to yourself that according to his memories they aren't supposed to have chakra, Ibiki said. Inoichi sighed. I can't be sure. It might have to do with what brought him here. As he told Hokage-sama, he was in an underground tomb, stopping one of these Templars from acquiring ancient and powerful relics. There was a fight, and he slew the man. But during the fighting, the relics were activated, and their energy ripped open a hole that swallowed him up. His memories are mostly blank during his time in this polar vortex, except for the memory of excruciating pain. Then he crashed into a pond, in training ground 14 I believe. It's possible that whatever chaotic energy was in the vortex transplanted chakra into him before it spat him out. Saratobi watched Raphael carefully. And we have no way of sending him back, he said. Whatever sent him here is not something we can reproduce. In essence, he is stuck here, he said quietly. Ripped away from everything he knows and cast into a world full of unknown dangers and secrets. Ibiki glanced at him. Hokage-sama, perhaps we can give him a home here then. Put him to use. He is obviously skilled at what he does, despite his age. With training in how to use his chakra, he could make a powerful asset. Saratobi glanced at Ibiki. After a few moments, he quietly nodded. Perhaps, he said, before entering the room. Raphael just looked at him. So what now? Are you going to lock me away? He asked in an emotionless voice. Saratobi shook his head. No. I wish to make you an offer, he said. Whatever it was that brought you here, it is not something we can undo. We don't know how to send you back home. But if you wish, we're willing to help you settle into this world. Raphael scoffed. And what exactly would I do? I'm the only one of my kind here. Saratobi smiled. Not quite. You may be the only one of your order here, but you are not the only one trained to kill people stealthily. In fact, every shinobi under my command is expected to do such a thing one day, if they haven't already. We are ninja. It is our job, sometimes, to assassinate people. If you like, I'd be willing to offer you a job here in Konoha. Raphael looked at him. So what is it you'd want me to do exactly, he asked. Become your personal assassin? Take down targets who threaten this village and your rule? I will not become some cold-blood enforcer, if that is what you are asking, he said. Saratobi sighed. I am not asking that of you. Konoha tries to be more diplomatic and peaceful. Or at least, as much as we can in this world. I would need you to assassinate people, yes. But generally it would be those who are threats to the safety of the people in this village, whether inside or out. I would ask you to take down those who would bring war and harm to the people I lead and protect. Is that too much to ask for? Raphael looked down a bit before sighing. I need time to think about it. Everything that has happened in my entire world has been turned upside down. Saratobi nodded. I understand, Raphael-san. I will have you escorted to someplace more comfortable, where you may think about it. However, your weapons and armor will remain in custody for now, and you'll have an Anbu stationed outside your room. He quietly stood up. When you make your decision, please inform the guard outside your room. He will escort you to me. Good night, Raphael-san. Saratobi exited the room, leaving Raphael to stare at the table. He barely looked up when one of the masked figures, similar to those he had encountered earlier, removed the shackles from his arms. His body seemed to move on autopilot as he was led to the upper levels of the Anbu headquarters, where rooms for VIP prisoners were kept. Raphael was led into a two-room apartment with a couch that folded out into a bed. The second room was the bathroom. Raphael nodded to the guard after he was shown how the couch bed worked and quietly laid down as the guard exited the room and took up his post. As he lay there, Raphael's mind was going a mile a minute. His entire world had pretty much been destroyed. He was stuck in a world he knew nothing about, without any foreseeable way of getting home. What was he going to do? What could he do? He began to think about that. Currently, he knew nothing about this world, other than it seemed remarkably similar to Japan. At least, what he could remember of Japan from what his friend Sasuke had told him. He had no real skills beyond those of an assassin or a thief. And quite honestly, he didn't want to go back to picking pockets again. Not unless it was part of a mission. The more Raphael thought about it, the more he realized the inescapable truth. That he was going to have to make do with what he had. And currently what he had was an offer from someone willing to utilize his skills. He closed his eyes, sighing. Perhaps he could work for this village. At least for a while. He slowly drifted off to sleep. Next morning, Raphael groaned quietly as sunlight coming through a barred window landed on his face, waking him up. He slowly got up, mumbling softly, before glancing at the window. It was always one of his favorite times of the day, watching the sun rise each morning. He slowly walked over to the window and held one of the bars as he watched the sun slowly rise up. Letting out a sigh, he turned as the door opened and one of the masked guards entered with a tray of food. "Breakfast," he said simply, setting it down on the couch bed. Raphael nodded as he came over. "Thank you," he said. "May I ask when your leader is available to speak to?" The Anbu looked at him through the mask. "I'll send a message to him. He'll send for you when he's ready," he said as he left. Raphael quietly began to eat and quietly prayed that the old leader was willing to accept the conditions he had. A few hours later, Saratobi was in his office when his secretary buzzed him. "Hokage-sama, the Anbu is here with Raphael-san." "Very good. Send them in please," he said. The door soon opened and in entered Raphael with his Anbu escort. Saratobi smiled. "It is good to see you, Raphael-san. Please sit." Raphael nodded and did so before speaking. "I've thought about your offer. And I'm willing to perhaps offer you my services. If you agree to some conditions I have," he said. Saratobi sat back. "Let me hear them." Raphael sighed. "I'll agree to work for Konoha. But I will not accept assignments for targets that I do not consider legitimate targets. If you ask me to target a warmongering noble who is trying to spread war and chaos, I'll do it. Or a weapons merchant who is supplying bandits and other such shady or illegal groups, I'll do it. Or someone who intends ill against this village or people in general, I'll do it. But I will not target someone who is not doing wrong. One of the tenets I follow is stay your blade from the flesh of an innocent. That means that if you ask me to kill someone simply because you disagree with them, or because it will expand Konoha's power, or because you receive a mission for taking out such a target, I won't do it, as it goes against my principles and beliefs." Saratobi nodded. "I can agree to that. I highly doubt I would order such an assassination anyways. Secondly, I wish for your permission to perhaps begin building a new brotherhood here in Konoha and eventually expand it out to other villages. By recruiting other assassins, we can start to hand out assassination missions to those in other villages instead of having to travel there myself. I also ask that any recruits I might draw in be allowed the same conditions I am asking for." Saratobi thought about it. "It will depend on who you recruit to your cause. But I think for now, I can agree to this condition, provided I am allowed to make exceptions based on recruits you choose." Raphael nodded. "Agreed. Next, I will only answer you, or whoever your replacement may be. I will not answer to anyone else unless you put them in charge of me. Agreed?" Saratobi gave him a nod of confirmation, and Raphael continued. "Lastly, I want your word that if Konoha should violate my conditions that I have set, or that it becomes corrupt, me and those I may have recruited from this village are free to leave, or are free to take out those who are responsible for the violation or corruption." Saratobi hesitated. "That is a steep order," he said. "But then again, if such a thing were to occur, it would likely be because I am no longer Hokage. I will write a document now, and we shall sign it." He began to write the contract up before signing it. Raphael bit his lip though. "I'm afraid I can't read your language," he said. Saratobi raised an eyebrow. "I see. Well, that does raise a problem, as you have no idea what I wrote here, do you?" he asked. "We'll have to rectify that problem swiftly. For now though, I give you my solemn vow that what I have written here will not entrap you in any way, shape, or form." Raphael hesitantly took it and signed his name. "I will wish to see this document once I have learned to read your language." he said. Sarutobi nodded. I'll make you a copy so you can have it at all times. For now though, we shall see about proper accommodations, as well lessons in reading and this world, he said. I would also like to offer you the chance to learn some of our skills and abilities. You possess the means to do so, though it will take time and effort. Raphael nodded. I thank you for that, he said, as Sarutobi finished making a copy of the contract, which they both again signed, and he handed it to Raphael. He then signaled the Anbu to come forward. When the operative did, he handed him a note. Please escort Raphael-san to the apartment complex at this address and give the owner this note, he said. The Anbu nodded. Afterwards, please retrieve Raphael-san's equipment and have it brought to his apartment. The Anbu bowed. As you command, Hokage-sama, he said, before waiting for Raphael. Raphael bowed his head in thanks to the aged Hokage before following the Anbu out. Sarutobi sat back, thinking for a moment. Raphael could possibly be exactly what he needed for a mission he had planned, but could never execute. But, as he was, the young man wouldn't make it. Not yet at least. He sighed as he pulled out a small stack of papers which listed which shinobi were currently available. He had a C-rank mission for one of them. Finding the one he wanted, he buzzed his secretary and told her to send out a call for said shinobi. Meanwhile, Raphael found himself standing outside the door of his new home. The Anbu had taken him to the apartment and spoke to the owner, who after reading the note, handed Raphael a key with a symbol on it. After some searching, Raphael found a matching symbol on one of the doors. He quietly unlocked it and entered. His eyes widened as he slowly looked around. It was a strange-looking place, at least to him. It had 3 rooms, consisting of a living dining room, a kitchen, and a bedroom with a bathroom attached to it. But the items in the bathroom and kitchen confused him. There was a large construct in the kitchen that was cold inside, and a basin with a strange protrusion out of which came water. There appeared to be an oven, but there was no room to build a fire to cook food in. The bathroom was equally strange. While he recognized the bathtub and the sink for what they were, he was fascinated by how they both had strange metallic protrusions that seemed to hold water in them. He was also curious about the strange ceramic bowl object that seemed to have a pool of water in it that was sucked into the bowels of said bowl when he pressed a metal lever. What on earth was it, and where was the chamber pot for when he needed to relieve himself? His musings were interrupted by knocking at the front door. He went towards it and opened it, finding the Anbu operative from before. Yes? He asked. The Anbu held out a large bag to him. Your equipment, he said simply. Raffles' eyes widened. Oh yes. Thank you, he said, taking the bag. Hokage-sama also wished for me to inform you that he is sending someone to teach you the basic things you need to know. You can expect them here in the next hour or two to begin your lessons, the Anbu said, before disappearing. Raphael just blinked before shrugging and closing his front door. He went to the bedroom, where he set the bag on the bed and immediately began trying to find a way to open it. After some experimentation, he found a small metal strip he could pull on, which seemed to run along 2 metal strips. When he pulled it one way, the strips came apart and opened the bag. When he pulled it the other way, it closed. Fascinating, he whispered as he played with it a few times. Finally having enough, he began to remove his items from the bag and started to check them over for damage or missing supplies. While he was doing this, a somewhat angry figure was heading in his direction, mumbling under her breath. I can't believe I'm being assigned such a stupid and mundane task. Damn it, Hokage-sama, what did I do to deserve this? Anko Mitarashi was very pissed off, and with good reason. Her only friend had verbally stabbed her in the back last night. And when she had tried to sleep, her next-door neighbors had kept her up all night with arguing and then make-up sex. And this morning she had been called in to meet the Hokage. She had thought she was going to get a decent mission. Instead, she had been told she was going to tutor someone on things like reading and history. She wasn't a teacher. She was a chunin. A damn chunin kunoichi. She just grumbled as she headed to the address she was given. Surprisingly enough, it was in her apartment complex, though on a higher floor. That would make things easier. She headed up to the apartment door and took a deep breath. Time to get this over with, she said, before knocking. A couple minutes later the door opened and she looked up, only for her eyes to widen. Because standing before her was the guy who rescued her from last night. Raphael blinked as he looked at her. Hey wait, you're the girl from last night. Anko pointed at him. You're the guy who took out those civilians. What are you doing here? Raphael looked at her. Well, I live here now. And I'm waiting for a tutor. And I'm guessing you're the tutor? She just nodded a bit. Yeah, can I ask what is going on? Raphael sighed as he moved to the side so she could enter. It's a long story, he said. Anko entered as she glanced at him. I've got lots of time it seems. Raphael closed his eyes before indicating the couch that had come with the apartment. Sit down then, and I'll try to explain. You probably won't believe me. Anko grinned. Try me. I've heard everything, she said. Oh, how wrong she was. Anko mused quietly to herself as she ate some dango at her favorite cafe. It had been an interesting couple of months for the young Kunoichi. First she learned that the man who had rescued her was actually from some other reality or something like that. A place with no chakra and apparently without things such as indoor plumbing and electricity. When Raphael had finished explaining to her where he was from, that first day she had gone to teach him, she had thought it was an elaborate joke or prank. However, after talking to the Hokage about it, she had learned that it was all true. Which led to her getting drunk to make sense of it all. Eventually though, she had come to terms with what she had learned and had found Raphael to be a rather eager student. It had been rather amusing and embarrassing to explain certain things like how a toilet worked and what a refrigerator was. But when it came to things like history, geography, and learning to read and write, she had found him to be very studious. He had grasped the basics of reading and writing kanji and was now working on becoming fully versed in being able to read and write them. She had also been present when the Hokage had done an assessment of Raphael's fighting skills. Raphael had been partnered against a Chunin with the rules that the spar would only include taijutsu and weapons. Known ninjutsu or genjutsu. The Chunin had started off the fight, launching a punch at Raphael. Raphael's response had been to catch the fist with his left hand, deliver a stunning blow to the Chunin's stomach to drive the air out of him, then a vicious uppercut that knocked the Chunin flat on his back. In an instant Raphael was on him, a hidden blade at his throat. However, a second battle, this time against a Jounin, showed that Raphael, while fast and skilled, couldn't match the sheer speed that a shinobi of Jounin rank was capable of achieving. That's not to say the battle was one-sided. Raphael had remained defensive initially, using blocks and counters to open up the Jounin to attacks. As he told Saratobi and Anko, that was the style of an assassin forced into combat. If they could not escape or kill their enemy with the initial blow, they entered a defensive stance, maneuvering and waiting for the opportunity to strike. After finishing the assessment, Saratobi had asked Anko to also begin instructing Raphael in utilizing his chakra. Which Anko had gladly done, enjoying practical teaching over teaching academics. Every morning the two would head to a training ground where they would work out, spar, and Anko would teach Raphael how to first access his chakra and then how to control it. It had taken Raphael about a week to fully call upon his chakra since he was unfamiliar with calling upon it. Afterwards, Anko had taught him the basic control exercise, the tree walking exercise. It took Raphael the rest of the month to master it, after which Anko started him on water walking. Raphael had been extremely grateful for everything Anko had taught him so far. In return, he offered to teach her some skills that might help her as well. He had started teaching the stealth skills of an assassin. How to blend with a crowd of people, to be able to move in the open without being seen. He also began teaching her freerunning and parkour skills. Most shinobi would scoff at the idea of learning these skills when they could use chakra to climb the side of a building or leap over obstacles and such. But Raphael pointed out a few problems. What's to stop an enemy from sensing the chakra being used to climb the side of a building? Or what if the shinobi's chakra was running low or was cut off from them for some reason? The ability to move quickly using only their muscles and endurance and to be able to move fluidly through any environment would be a huge boon in those situations. She grinned, thinking how things had worked out well for both of them as she reached for another skewer of dango. She stopped though as she sensed a figure behind her. She turned her head slightly. "What are you doing here, Yuhi-san?" she asked in a slightly annoyed voice. Kurenai mentally sighed as she sat next to Anko. She had wanted to apologize to Anko much sooner than this, but sadly she had been assigned a border patrol only a couple days after her small disagreement with Anko. She had returned yesterday evening and now had sought out her friend to try and mend things between them. "I wanted to apologize to you, Anko. You were right. The Uzumaki kid shouldn't be punished for what he holds inside himself. It's not like he chose to be the container of the Kyuubi, she said softly. And you were right about how you two are similar. I see now how you could take my words to mean that I was saying you should be attacked by those who were hurt by Orochimaru. I never meant that, and I certainly don't think that. So I'm sorry, she said quietly. Anko watched her before sighing. I'll forgive you. But don't expect me to be all chummy right off the bat. It really hurts hearing you say those things. And I've already had enough people I thought were close to me betray my trust, she said. Kurenai nodded. I understand, Anko. And thank you. Anko nodded before grinning. So, you remember that guy I told you about? Who rescued me? Well, guess what? He's here in the village now, she said. Kurenai blinked. Oh? Is he a shinobi? Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. If you want the next part of this story, let me know in the comment box. See you next time, till then sayonara.